And that tells us about the uncertainty impact of these global developments. And uncertainty also means unpredictability of what these projections are. So even if I have made these projections and we are looking at that, there is a lot of uncertainty that this is going to last unless we have some resolution to the crisis that has evolved in. So that is one message that we make. The other thing that Bangladesh is concerned about is, of course, we have a new government, and we have just ahead of us the idea of a graduation prospect, graduation out of our LDC status in November. So nothing is uncertain, nothing is certain. We have, from the academic and research community, I think we pointed out that Bangladesh has gone through 5 major economic shocks, starting from the COVID shock of 2020-21, then you have the Russia-Ukraine war, then the supply chain shock, then we had an exchange rate shock that Bangladesh, this is somewhat internal, but then that was followed up with a political shock, political disruption, that also caused economic disruption. And now we have this Gulf War. So we have, this economy has to deal with 5 major shocks. So this is no time for an economy to be graduating out of LDC status that it has been in this position since 1975. So this would be another shock at Bangladesh economy market. So we have to go slower, and I hope the government takes those steps. And our understanding is, on the growth side, let me just talking about growth in the Bangladesh economy. This is not the time where you can expect growth to be too high. Okay, I would like to believe there is a normal growth rate for the Bangladesh economy, the intrinsic growth rate in normal times. And that is intrinsic growth rate of the Bangladesh economy, I strongly believe that 6%. We can grow 7-8% if we can do more reform. We can do better in the external sector, and of course we do reforms in the domestic economy like tax reforms and so on and so forth. So, but in times like this, at normal times, we can't expect growth to be anywhere even close to 6%. So all the projections we have from the different multilateral organizations like IMF, World Bank, IMF is stating a 4.7% expected growth for FY 2026. That sounds optimistic, but we would like to live with that 4.7% to 5% growth. I think the government is expecting a 5% growth for FY 2026. So this is a muted growth rate that is being projected or estimated for Bangladesh in the year 2026. But all multilateral, including the government, is hoping for a better FY 2027, where we can see a growth rate of at least 6%. Moving from 5 to 6 is quite possible if this war ends sooner than later, and if also Bangladesh government undertakes some major reforms that have been long-standing, particularly I would say in the tax regime, both domestic taxes as well as trade taxes. There is an outstanding, long-standing reform agenda that has not been addressed. So we have to, in order to get to a 6% GDP growth rate in FY 2027, some of these reforms have to be addressed. Okay. Into next to the IMF slide. Now there is IMF slide. We now have the IMF, the last tranche of the IMF program hanging out there, and several messages are coming out that at least there was no clear statement from IMF that they're going ahead with the release of the last tranche before June. Some indication now that they might do it once the budget is out, something like that. But the key IMF conditions or key IMF program, the reform initiatives that are related to the release of the IMF funding. These are I think there are 5 of them: exchange rate reform, revenue reforms, fiscal consolidation, banking sector reforms, and macroeconomic stability targets. I would say Bangladesh is still in a decent position when it comes to macroeconomic stability targets. External sector, balance of payment stability was, I think, very well restored, thanks to the strong efforts from the central bank. Foreign exchange reserves was stabilized. The exchange rate was stabilized thanks to the flexible exchange rate, regimes that they get So exchange rate reform and macro stability, I think there should not be any issues. On the revenue reform, that's the weakest point of Bangladesh side, where IMF might have some issues. And fiscal consolidation also, there's this weak consolidation. Of course, banking sector reform. So we have to hedge our bets now whether IMF is or is not going to release the $1.3 billion, the last tranche. But in my view, I think given the global situation where it's a global crisis affecting the global economy, countries one after the other, the rich countries, the EMDs, emerging market economies, they are also so is Bangladesh. So in that kind of a context, IMF team should be more considerate and go ahead with the release of the last tranche of the program. So that is what I would say. On the trade side, on the trade development, we see what happened. Export performance has not been great, down 5%. So in FY 2026, we are not expecting exports to recover given the Gulf crisis. But on the import side, there is some sign that the economy is showing signs of movement. Import growth is 5%. Import growth should, a healthy import growth is required. And I would like to say about 7-8% growth for Bangladesh economy is the appropriate growth rate for it. If it is higher than 7-8%, imports are larger than exports. The current import projection would be about $65 billion, and whereas exports are going to be around slightly under $50 billion. So import growth should not be 10% plus, or double-digit import growth is not healthy for the balance of trade. So I think the 5% import growth is slightly below what Bangladesh should be getting, because the import penetration ratio, which is import over GDP, is currently at 16%, which is very low. The world average import penetration is 45 to 50%, and East Asian countries have an import penetration ratio of 40 to 60%. So Bangladesh is way behind. That tells us that Bangladesh's trade regime is very restrictive on imports, and it's not good. If import regime is restrictive, you can't get a boost in exports. That is one message that needs to be given out. We are always obsessed with export promotion, but imports have to be, supportive of any export promotion initiative. So that is something that we need to take on board. Our import regime needs to be much more open. So the current Our assessment is our import regime is highly restrictive. And that is not good for export expansion and export diversification. So Bangladesh needs to change its approach to import import promotion as well. Of course, we need to import a lot of raw materials and intermediate goods in order to support our wholesale. That is a requirement. So there, all we have to say is that this is the it shows the sign of very muted growth in the economy. And finally, on the good news is still there, the foreign exchange reserves. And with foreign exchange reserves are, about 5 months covered by the IMF estimate, the BPM6, and 5.5 months covered by the Bangladesh Bank estimate, which is still below what we would say comfort level of 6. Once we reach 6 months import cover, that would be considered comfortable with foreign exchange reserves. But one has to acknowledge the fact that the interim government and the governor, the Bangladesh Bank, adopted this flexible exchange rate system, which actually ensured restoration of stability in the balance of payments, restoration of stability in the foreign exchange reserves, and a sustainable current account balance and sustainable financial account balance as well. So those were the good things that happened, and we hope that that can be maintained in the next few months. But given the challenges that we have from the international economy, it's going to be tough, but focus has to remain. With that, I think I have taken more time than he gave me. Now pass on to Dr. Ashikur Rahman, Principal Economist of PRI, to make the keynote presentation.
Thank you, Sattar. I would like to, of course, good morning to everyone. I would like to thank our chief guest. I dearly call him Mahbubur Chacha, for coming to our presentation for the first time, I think. So this is definitely an honor for us.
But not the last time.
Not the last time.
Yes, to come
not the last time. And also my good friend Clinton from DFAT, who has been supporting this initiative for last 11 months, and all the discussion we have, and friends from the media and development partners. Now, I think I don't want to repeat what has been suggested, but if we go to the presentation, what we can see, if we look at the growth story, and if I give you a brief history of our growth story who are not familiar, Bangladesh's growth story had seen kind of a steady rise from 1972 to 2019. If you look at the 5-year growth averages from 1972 to 1979, you will see Bangladesh's growth story, seeing a secular increase of 1% every decade, and we have reached a 5-6% kind of an equilibrium by I think 2019, or a bit more than that. So, and what was interesting about that growth evolution was that growth volatility was very low. From 72 to 2019, we saw an upward movement in average growth, and we saw a downward movement in average volatility of growth, which in technical terms we call the standard deviation of growth over time. Now, interestingly, since 2019, that story has reversed. We have seen the average growth going down since 2019 and growth volatility going up since 2019. And as our chair said, that a part of the reason for this reversal is that since 2019, we have faced 5 shocks. We have faced the COVID shock in 2019. We then faced the Ukraine shock. We then encountered the Trump tariffs, and now the Middle East crisis and the uncertainty with LDC graduation. But external shock is a part of the story. There has also been a lot of what I call self-inflicted wounds on Bangladesh economy. We have plundered our financial sector, we have fractured our financial sector, and we have almost done no real reform in the fiscal sector over the last 10 years, which basically means we have one of the lowest tax to GDP ratio in the world. Now, as an academic, I want to believe that Bangladesh's growth story and growth potential is very high. We have the young demography, we have very cheap labor, we have people getting connected to the global space. I'm optimistic. But then we also have to question whether this downward trend over the last 6 years is a blip or is it a new normal? Under the structural conditions we are facing, under the political economy conditions we are facing, and the kind of reform reversal that it might induce, and the kind of self-inflicted wound we have a habit of inflicting on our economic prospects. So this is a question that we have to ask, that whether this growth reversal and this increase in growth volatility is a part of these structural condition and political economy reality. Now, we know that, we know that the growth, we have the three crises that is happening, and almost all the outlooks have kind of downgraded Bangladesh's growth. But look, India is growing at 7%. India is growing at 7%. And India is navigating all these global crises much better than Bangladesh. And if you look at India's internal conditions, they have a much better tax to GDP ratio. Their NPL is 2%, while our NPL is 30%. So these external shocks is not necessarily, the final say on what you can do and what you don't do. What we do internally also matters in terms of how we navigate these external shocks. Now, if we go to the external sector, I think Dr. Sattar correctly points out that we are still, there's no need to panic at this point. We have around 5 months of import coverage. It's not excellent, but it's not very bad. But the alarming news is that for 8 straight months, our exports are bleeding. Now, in popular media, the focus is United States, but we are bleeding, our exports are bleeding in Europe. And nobody is talking about why our exports are bleeding in Europe. You look at top countries like Germany, United Kingdom, our export fell in Germany by 13%. And that's a huge market for Bangladesh. And in Bangladeshi media and within the business community, nobody is talking about what is going wrong in Europe. And this is something we have to ask ourselves. Europe is almost 30 to 40% of our export basket, while US is 10 to 20% of our export basket. So let us not ignore Europe while we are thinking of the export story. In terms of import, yes, 5% import growth is not bad, but we could have done better. But you can see that capital machinery import is still negative, which shows that private sector is still did not still yet gain the confidence to start, importing, start that investment drive that we were thinking they would do by now, once an elected government comes in play. You can see our energy imports, right? March's import is much lower than what was March last year. So the energy shock is biting into our investment. But so far, we did not see any balance of payment crisis. So far, we are navigating the storm quite well, but things can go very rough. In terms of the financial sector, over the last 20 months, we have seen the inflation moderate from 12% to around 8-9%. But this Middle East crisis and the oil price adjustment and all the associated adjustment is expected to trigger inflation upwards. And ADB projections say that inflation in Asia can go up between 6 to 3%, up by 6 to 3%. And if Bangladesh does not manage this crisis well, then Bangladeshi inflation will go upward. But within the financial sector, you can see that Bangladesh has one of the highest inflation in the region. You can see this curve that our inflation is higher than Pakistan, is higher than India, and is higher than Sri Lanka. And if you look at the real policy rate, we have one of the lowest real policy rate in the region. But Sri Lanka's policy rate is around 6%. India and Pakistan are even higher than Bangladesh. So in the debate that we have a very high policy rate is not really true if we compare real policy rate across the region. So the contractionary monetary policy must prevail. In terms of financial sector, the banking sector, we know that our financial sector was plundered by politically connected oligarchs. Our non-performing loan stands at 30%, which is around 5.5 trillion taka. And over the last 20 months, the single instrumental ordinance that was passed in the financial sector was the Banking Resolution Ordinance, which was an international best practice that aimed to improve moral hazard problems within the banking sector where the owners plundered their banks with impunity, right? Now, the recent amendments are concerning to that ordinance, which allows willful defaulters to get back into the ownership structure of the banks and therefore plunder again, right? And we hope that this issue is reconsidered by policymakers, because what it will do is it will hinder the confidence in the banking sector. If you look at the deposit growth, sir, the deposit growth fell as below as 6%. Now, with all those reforms, you can see over the last 5 months, deposit growth increased to double digit, which basically means people were returning to banks. People were saving in banks. Now, if we again give a signal to the market that the plunderers are back with impunity, you don't expect the double-digit deposit growth to continue. So let us not undo what has been achieved. In terms of the fiscal sector, our revenue performance has not been good. The revenue shortfall this year will be around 1.1 trillion to 1.3 trillion, I think. Already it's touching 1 trillion, and we have one of the worst tax to GDP ratio in the world. And again, over in this sector, we are seeing backtracking from reforms that were trying to establish a global best practice of dividing revenue administration from revenue policy. And this is unfortunate. And what this burden is doing, what this subsidy burden of 1 trillion taka, the interest rate burden of 1 trillion taka, is for the first time in 20 months, government has resumed central bank borrowing. In the month of May, the government borrowed 20,000 crore taka from Bangladesh Bank, which basically means the central bank is again printing money. Now, which will fuel inflationary pressure if this continues. Now, if I can shortly summarize what is happening. Bangladesh experienced a fragile economic recovery over the last 20 months. Our reserves were built up from 18 billion to 30 billion. Our inflation moderated from 12% to 8%. And our deposit growth went from single digit to double digit. Yet this recovery was underpinned by core vulnerabilities. Our banking sector was fractured with a 30% NPL. Our private sector credit growth dipped to 6% because banks were being too cautious. Our growth plummeted to 3% in Q2 of fiscal year 26. So, given that these external shocks of Middle East war, the Trump tariff uncertainty, the uncertainty around LDC graduation is putting added stress on our balance of might put added stress on our balance of payment. on inflation management, on fiscal sector pressures. And against that backdrop, the fact that we have signaled to the market that we might backtrack on critical fiscal sector reform and critical financial sector reform heightens attention, creates a heightened tension in our macroeconomy. And it creates unnecessary uncertainty by creating this tension with IMF. And as I said again, backtracking on economic reform will be tantamount to a self-inflicted wound that our economy cannot afford at this economic juncture. Now, I want to phrase this for our friends in the media. There is a populist narrative out there that these economic reform are IMF conditionalities. I'm sorry, I beg to differ. These economic reforms are national economic imperatives for supporting long-term growth. We need cautious macroeconomic management. We need fiscal prudence. We need monetary prudence. If we are serious about making this recovery sustainable. Thank you, everyone. So, এই আলোচনাটা আমরা এখানে করলাম তার মূল বিষয়টি হচ্ছে যে এখন যে আন্তর্জাতিক অর্থনৈতিক অস্থিরতাটা আছে ওয়েস্ট এশিয়া বা মিডল ইস্টে বলি, ট্রাম্প আনসার্টেনটির কারণে বলি বা এলডিসি গ্রাজুয়েশনের ল্যাক অফ ক্ল্যারিটির জন্য বলি, তা আমাদের যে অর্থনৈতিক যে স্টেবিলাইজেশনটা আমরা অ্যাচিভ করেছি এইটাতে কিছুটা ভালনারেবিলিটি অ্যাড করে। এখন এর মধ্যে আমরা যদি অর্থনৈতিক সংস্কার থেকে সরে দাঁড়াই, সেটা অর্থনৈতিকভাবে একটি আত্মঘাতী সিদ্ধান্ত হবে। কারণ এই অর্থনৈতিক সংস্কারকে আইএমএফ এর দাবি হিসেবে দেখা ভুল হবে। এটা আমাদের অভ্যন্তরীণ অর্থনীতির গুরুত্ব এবং দীর্ঘমেয়াদী প্রবৃদ্ধির নিশ্চয়তার জন্য এই অর্থনৈতিক সংস্কারগুলো আমাদের নিজেদেরই প্রয়োজন। তাই we must see these economic reform as national economic imperative এবং আশা করি অর্থনৈতিক সংস্কারের ব্যাপারে আমাদের অবস্থান ইতিবাচক হবে। থ্যাংক ইউ।
হ্যাঁ, ধন্যবাদ। মানে সব শেষে যে কনক্লুশনটা এটাই, this is the message that should go out. যে আমাদের এই সেই ইকোনমিক রিফর্ম কতগুলো বেসিক মৌলিক কতগুলো সংস্কারের প্রস্তাব দেওয়া হয়েছে, সরকার এগুলো অ্যাকসেপ্ট করেছে। আইএমএফ এইগুলো এই সরকার যখন এই ইনিশিয়েটিভ গুলো সিদ্ধান্ত নিয়েছে, আইএমএফ এর যে সাপোর্ট গুলো আছে সেই সাপোর্ট এসেছে। I wouldn't call it conditions actually. These are national economic imperatives that Bangladesh has to do. It is not only, it will follow not only, it will be what Dr. Ashikur just mentioned, self-inflicted wound or whatever. So these are economic, national economic imperatives, these economic reforms. These are very fundamental and absolutely essential in the current state of affairs. And particularly, interim government is this is an interim government, they can't make all those decisions, but now we have an elected democratic government, and our record, historical record, which a democratic elected government can take very drastic reform measures. 1991 was an exact historical first, and that is when the major economy shifting of the direction of the economy took place in 1991, and right now we hope that the conditions are just right for that kind of very deep fundamental reforms to take, economic reforms to take place, and the IMF can support these measures. So Kupalo, we had a fantastic, very comprehensive presentation. Now we can go to our distinguished panelists, starting with so we have a very young panelist, but the last time I heard you speak, you were absolutely on the dot and very Okay, very articulate. So, welcome once again, and please share your perspectives on the economy. And then Chima Mustafa
Thank you.
from the Mega Group.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi. Thank you very much, Zaidi, for having me once again. I represent a number of industries, and the wonderful summary of this current situation given by both Dr. Zaidi sir and Dr. Ashikur. If there was one thing I would pick on, it's the self-inflicted wound that I speak about. And I would like to focus on one particular industry, which I think is also going to address the export diversification that you spoke about, sir. We are always focused on the R&D sector and the export there, but there is the shipping industry is I think one that we are ignoring. It is now currently contributing to the funds reserve by $1.5 billion. So this is in freight earnings and seafarers' salary. We have about 107 mother vessels in the country. 100 of them are owned by 4 to 5 private sector companies, 7 by BSC, Bangladesh Shipping Corporation. Just for comparison, India has 1,500, Vietnam has 1,500, Singapore has 4,200, Malaysia 1,500, mid-1,500s, China has 6,600. So the issue here is that the shipping industry is treated like any other industry. Import of raw material, import of capital machinery, but this industry has its own modus operandi, and we need to, as policymakers, as the government has to realize that if they want this industry to grow. So if we just look at the way we purchase this mother vessel, a very short period of time, you get maybe a couple of hours to confirm your purchase, and then you have to open the LC and pay in the limited time that you have. Now, because it is treated as a missionary port, there is a cap by the central bank for going for special permission for any import above 3 million. So it goes through the same process, it gets stuck, weeks, months, the LC does not come. Another issue, so no one's going to wait to sell a vessel for a month. It's open to the market, they will they will take it back or they will penalize us because we did not pay them on time. The second issue is that because it's so limited in the time that we have to make the purchase, we usually, the owners have to do it from their own capital, so pay in cash. So what we recently tried is we got an IFC permission to get finance the 2 new purchases that we need. However, Bangladesh Bank has rejected that proposal, saying the purchase is already done. Move on. But this is if you look at the growth, how many companies? Because as I said, only 4 or 5 companies have mother vessels now. Why not let others do it? But how many companies are going to be able to afford 40 million purchase of a mother vessel from their own cash? If we look at India again, they have export credit guarantee, they have maritime development funds, but here we are expected to support it from our own funds. And even when we do manage to get a competitive financing method, we are discouraged from availing that. India has the target to be the top 5 ship-owning countries in the world by 2047. In 1996, shipping was declared a critical foreign currency earner, yet it lacks the constructive support for it to reach that stage. Another policy shift that happened last year was the shipping industry had a VAT tax holiday till 2030, which was withdrawn suddenly last year. So what happens to these companies?
One clarification I would like. Are you talking about the shipping production industry?
No, purchase.
Purchase.
We don't really make mother vessels. Bangladesh doesn't have that capacity yet.
Yeah.
So I'm just speaking about the purchase of. So,
Bangladesh Bank import restricted.
yeah. So the 27.5% tax is now on freight earnings. If we look at India, so what do? There is a tonnage tax. What's a tonnage tax? Based on the size of your vessel, you pay a minimum sum. So the owners they have a visibility as to what they have to pay to the government at the end of the year. But here, the 27.5% is a burden because if Bangladesh now imports, as you said, so we are a very import-dependent country. we spend about $14 billion. It must be more now because of the war. So if a very small amount of that is earned by the Bangladeshi national flag carriers, DSC included, this remittance stays within it. Not only that, if you have this industry flourish, we are exporting mostly lower caliber or labors, basically. But this is a highly specialized industry. You can have more schools, more institutions who are facilitating training these crews who earn $12,000–15,000. And this is also exported because if you look at Philippines, if you look at Vietnam, hundreds of seafarers are working in countries all over the world, in mother vessels all over the world. Bangladesh, that's also an opportunity that sort of can spin us from here. We're missing on that. The tax holiday, I covered that. Okay. There was, and now there's back. Now it's supposed to be not there again. A confusion on a 7.5% purchase tax. So at the time of purchase, you pay 7.5%. 7.5% on a $35 million vessel, 2.5 something. How are we going to compete? When other countries are not doing that, what will be our FOC, like our fixed cost compared to those? Will anyone charter my vessel at those rates? If they don't charter, what will I do with these vessels? If you look at 2014, 2015, similar exceptions happened, withdrawal of these facilities, and the number of vessels crashed from 85 to 35. And the countries took nearly a decade to recover those numbers. We do not want history to be repeating itself. So if you look at the countries like India, what did they do? They looked at the shipping sector. They said, this industry is too important for us to leave to the market. We're going to walk hand in hand with the private sector. Bangladesh looks at its shipping sector and says, here are some tax exemptions which we may or may not take off whenever we want. So one approach builds an industry, the other approach creates confusion, uncertainty, and the numbers speak for itself. BSC, the Bangladesh Shipping Corporation, they proudly declare that this is the only entity of the Bangladesh government which makes money. What does that say about this industry? Very promising. Even if crisis is like this, when our vessels got stuck, when there was no availability of bunker, we could reroute our vessels and make sure that my factory was running. Because a lot of our clinker cement materials come from UAE. All of that was stopped. I could divert my vessel, I would say, go to China, pick up this material for me. These are emergency backups that this country can get if we focus on this industry, in addition to the foreign currency, the employment that it will generate. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very, very pointed, the explanation of what is wrong in that particular sector. So there are two takeaways from what you said. One is you talked about export. This is part of export diversification. The shipping service that Bangladesh can render, it's part of the shipping export of shipping services. In the services trade area, Bangladesh runs a big deficit of, I think, about $5–6 billion. The overall, I think the import of shipping services is greater than the export of shipping services. Okay. So on the services trade, we have a deficit of about $5–6 billion. Total is $10 billion of import and about $5–6 billion of export. But so this is one area where the new services where we have the advantage. We can go in for purchasing these mother vessels to provide the shipping service. Our trade has grown. Import and export trade has grown from $30 billion in 2000 to about $140 billion today. And all of the shipping is being done by international shipping. Yeah, so there we had a scope there. Very good, thank you. And you pointed out the financial. This is a financing issue. You are able to attract or buy these mother vessels. We can only produce feeder vessels under 50,000 deadweight tons and so on. Mother vessels we can't produce, but we have to buy them. So financing is the big item. I think hopefully the government policymakers will listen make those arrangements for financing. So we may now move to our second distinguished panelist, Mr. Shakawat Ali. He's a visiting research fellow at Bangladesh Institute of Governance and Development. Mr. Shakawat Ali.
Thank you, Chair. For media, I think I want to talk in common. So that is very much important to give inputs for that. ধন্যবাদ আপনাদের সবাইকে। আমি একটা হার্ড হিটিং ইস্যুস থেকেই শুরু করতে চাই। আমরা খুব কঠিন একটা সময় দাঁড়িয়ে এক্সটার্নালি এন্ড ইন্টারনালি। এটা অসাধারণভাবে একটা অর্থনৈতিক ব্যাখ্যা প্রস্তুত করা হবে যে আমাদের অর্থনীতির ব্রেকটা কোথায় কম, ওখানে আমরা গ্রোথের দিকে যাচ্ছি না। এটা আপনাদের আলোচনা থেকে বেরিয়ে এসছে ডাটার ভিত্তিতে, যেটা হচ্ছে 2019 থেকে 2018 এই ব্যাগ 18-তে এসে যে নির্বাচনটা হলো, সেই নির্বাচনটার পলিটিক্যাল ইকোনমি কিন্তু বাংলাদেশের ভেতরকার ইকোনমিক ডাইনামিক্স এর একটা চেঞ্জ করেছে। সোশ্যোলজিস্ট হিসেবে এটা আমার ধারণা এবং এটা আমি দেখে আসছি। এবং এই সময়টা একটা ক্রনিক ক্যাপিটালিজমের জন্ম, এবং সেই জন্যই কিন্তু একটা গণ অভ্যুত্থান আমরা ফেস করলাম। এবং গণ অভ্যুত্থানের পরে একটা নির্বাচিত সরকার থাকে। প্রাইভেট সেক্টর, আমাদের অভ্যন্তরীণ যে বিনিয়োগ সেখানেও কিন্তু কমে গেছে, এবং আমরা ধারণা করছিলাম যে নির্বাচনের পরে এই পরিস্থিতি দেখে বিনিয়োগের জায়গাতেও কিন্তু একটা এনভায়রনমেন্ট আসবে। এই জায়গাটা আমরা কি দেখতে পাচ্ছি, আমি সেই জায়গাতেই ধরতে চাচ্ছি ব্যাংকিং সেক্টরের জায়গা থেকে। গ্রাহকদের আমরা কি বার্তা দিচ্ছি? আমরা এখানে দেখছি যে ডিপোজিট গ্রোথটা ডাবল ডিজিটে যাচ্ছে, কিন্তু ব্যাংকের যারা ম্যানেজমেন্টে আছে, যারা চালাচ্ছে ব্যাংকটা, তাদের বিহেভিয়ারাল প্যাটার্ন এবং তাদের গভর্নেন্সের জায়গায় যে হাউসকিপিং গুলো অন্তর্বর্তীকালীন সরকারে আমাদের যে প্রিভিয়াস গভর্নর যে গুছিয়ে নিয়েছে, যার প্রতিফলনটা আমরা দেখছিলাম দুটো জায়গায়। একটা হচ্ছে যে আমাদের রেমিটেন্সটা বাড়ছিল, এবং যে কারণে একটা কিন্তু স্বস্তির জায়গায় বাংলাদেশের অর্থনীতি ব্রিদিং স্পেস কিন্তু আমরা পাচ্ছি না। সেকেন্ড হচ্ছে যে আবর্জনা ব্যাংকিং সেক্টরে তৈরি হয়েছিল সেটা পরিষ্কারের কিন্তু একটা উদ্যোগ নেওয়া হয়েছে। যারা মানি লন্ডার ছিল তাদের ব্যাপারে একটা কঠিন পদক্ষেপের জায়গায় দিয়েছিল। আমি এবং বন্ধু ভাই আমাদের পাঠানো হয়েছিল নগদ, সেটা একটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট একটা মানি লন্ডারিং এর কেস, যেটা আমরা বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকের হয়ে বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংক সেই জায়গাটা করছে। এখন কাজটা করবার কথা হচ্ছে নির্বাচিত সরকারের, তারা কি করছে, তারা কি বার্তা দিচ্ছে। ডক্টর আশিক যে জায়গাটা তুলে ধরলেন, আমি সেই জায়গাটাই কথা বলতে চাই যে 5টা ব্যাংকে যে ইসলামিক ব্যাংকে যে একত্রিত করা হলো এবং সেখানে ইনভেস্ট করা হলো, এবং এখন যারা প্রাপ্ত মালিক ছিল তাদের যে ফেরত দেওয়ার প্রক্রিয়ায় আইনগুলো হচ্ছে, আমাদের ব্যবসায়ীর মহল সেটাকে কিভাবে দেখবে, কারণ তাদেরও কিন্তু এই জায়গাটা রেসপন্সিবিলিটি আছে। কারণ আমাদের সময় এসছে যে গুড ইনভেস্টার এন্ড ব্যাড ইনভেস্টার দেখার জন্য। না হলে দেশটা কিন্তু প্রতিবারই বটমলেস বাস্কেট দিয়ে তো আমরা শুরু করেছিলাম আমেরিকানদের সেই প্রেস দিয়ে, আমরা কিন্তু নিজেরাই নিজেদের সামর্থ্য ইঁদুর হয়ে কেটে কিন্তু নষ্ট করে ফেলছি। এই জায়গাটা কিন্তু আমি মনে করি ইকোনমিস্ট এবং ব্যবসায়ী মহলে সত্যিকার অর্থে হার্ট হিটিং গভর্নমেন্টকে মেসেজ দিতে হবে, কারণ সংস্কারের যে কাজগুলো হাত দেওয়া হয়েছিল সেখান থেকে ফেরার কোনো সুযোগ নাই। দ্বিতীয় হচ্ছে এই মানি লন্ডাররা বেসিক্যালি কারা, সেটাও কিন্তু আজকে অস্পষ্ট কিছু নয়। এদের মধ্যে যে ক্রনিং তৈরি হয়, পলিটিশিয়ান থাকে, আর্মি সিভিল ব্যুরোক্রেসি থাকে, কোর্ট থাকে, কোর্ট এটার অংশ হয়, মিডিয়াও থাকে, ইন্টেলেকচুয়াল গ্রুপস গুলো থাকে। এই জায়গাগুলো যদি আমরা সত্যিকার অর্থে মিডিয়ারও দায়িত্ব এখানে। যদি আপনারা এই সময় যদি আমরা ধরে নেই যে ডেমোক্রেটিক স্পেস আছে, সব কথা বলা যাচ্ছে, তাহলে কিন্তু আপনাদের প্রত্যেকটা কেসকে, যেটা করাও হচ্ছে কিছু কিছু, আমি মনে করি ইমিডিয়েট বেস পপুলিজমের জায়গা থেকে না, এখানে ন্যাশনাল সার্ভিসে সবাইকে এগিয়ে আসতে হবে। দ্বিতীয় যে কথাটি আমি বলতে চাই সেটা হচ্ছে যে এই গভর্নমেন্ট যে জায়গাটা একটা কঠিন সময় পড়েছে, সেটা হচ্ছে এক্সটার্নাল শকের এবং ইন্টারনাল শকের জায়গাতে এখানে নেভিগেট করে যে বাজেট আসছে, সেখানে যদি আবার টাকা ছাপিয়ে, যেটা আমরা লক্ষ্য করছি যে ভর্তুকি দিতে যে টাকা ছাপিয়ে যদি ইনফ্লেশন বাড়ায়, সেটা সরাসরি কিন্তু ইম্প্যাক্ট করবে গরিব মানুষের উপর, এবং এমপ্লয়মেন্ট তো প্রায় জিরো জায়গায় চলে গেছে। সেখানে মানসম্মত ব্যয় সক্ষমতা যদি দেখাতে না পারে, আমরা কিন্তু একটা গভীর ক্রাইসিসে পড়বো। এটা হয়ে যাওয়ার পরে বলার চেয়ে ঘটনার মানে প্রক্রিয়ার সঙ্গে কিন্তু আমাদের অ্যাডজাস্ট গুলো করতে হবে। আমি এই দুটো কথা বলে শেষ কথাটা বলতে চাই এইভাবে, সেটি হচ্ছে যেটা ডক্টর আশিক ঠিকভাবেই বলেছে, যে রক্তক্ষরণ হচ্ছে আমাদের অর্থনীতিতে। এই রক্তক্ষরণ কিন্তু এইভাবে আর আমরা বেশি দিন নিতে পারবো না, জাতি হিসেবে টিকে থাকা আমাদের জন্য কঠিন হবে। এবং শেষ করব আরেকটা খুব কঠিন কথা বলে, আমাদের বাস্তবতা যে আমাদের দেশের আমাদের পরিবারগুলোর একটা বড় অংশ এখন মাইগ্রেন্ট, তারা ইমিগ্রেশন নিয়েছে। তো আমাদের এই দ্বৈত নাগরিকত্বের ব্যাপারে একটা রাজনৈতিক সিদ্ধান্ত নিতে হবে। এটা ভালো, কারণ এই দ্বৈত নাগরিকত্বের মধ্য দিয়ে মালয়েশিয়াও ডেভেলপ করেছে, কিন্তু আমাদের প্রোগ্রেসিভ এমনকি ক্ষেত্র বিশেষে পলিটিশিয়ানদের, মিনিস্টারদের এখন দেখা যাচ্ছে এরকম অবস্থান পড়ে আছে। এটি কিন্তু আমাদের জাতীয় নিরাপত্তা, অর্থনৈতিক নিরাপত্তার জন্য হুমকি। তো আমাদের কঠিন সময় কিন্তু অপরচুনিটি। তো আমরা যেরকম 71 সালে ডিসাইড করতে পেরেছিলাম বাইরের শক্তিকে বের করে নিয়ে, আমাদের ভেতরকার যারা ইঁদুর হয়ে আমাদের জাতির মানে শ্রমশক্তি, মানে আমাদের সামর্থ্য, আমাদের যে সক্ষমতা, এগুলোকে যে কুরে কুরে খাচ্ছে, তার ভেতর থেকে দুর্বল করে দিচ্ছে, এই ছেদাগুলো বন্ধ করবার দায়িত্ব আমাদের সবার। এবং এখানে আমি মনে করি এই ক্রনিক ক্যাপিটালিজম যদি ভাঙতে হয়, ব্যবসায়ীদের কিন্তু ন্যাশনালিজমের জায়গা থেকে, জাতি উদ্ধারের জায়গা থেকে ভয়েস তুলতে হবে, কারণ তারাই জানে তাদের কমিউনিটিতে তারা খারাপ। এবং এই বয়কটের জায়গাটা বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংক সহ বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকের বিএফআই এর কাছে সবই তথ্য আছে, এই জায়গাটা একটা ন্যাশনাল কল হিসেবে আমাদের আসার সময় হয়েছে। ধন্যবাদ।
এবার আমরা আমাদের ফাইনাল ডিস্টিংগুইশড প্যানেলিস্ট ডক্টর আব্দুল মজিদ, former National Board of Revenue Chairman and a regular spokesman on the economy to the Fed. So may I invite Dr. Mojib, floor is yours.
Thanks, yeah. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the PRI as well as the Department of Foreign Affairs for organizing or patronizing or involving in this very critical moment. This is a monthly macroeconomic insight, which means every month we are here and we are briefing to all of them, and we are very grateful that with the representatives from the donor agencies you are there, and I think this type of dialogue, this type of sharing, I guess is very important. Particularly our today's chief guest, the chairman of the president of the ICC, which was called or created in Bangladesh in 1950, as Sattar has tried to mention, Zaidi Sattar has tried to mention that since 1991 to 95, actually, more and many economic or trade investment, everything institutions are being rules, particularly VAT was introduced to be this time, and it was very, very high time for the Bangladesh economy to grow view on the, let's say, now we are at this point. So Dr. Mahbubur Rahman, the ICC is not only an apex body of International Chamber of Commerce and Industry, but also plays a great role on the arbitration. Very important at the moment, our economy, world economy, we are at a very critical stage with the tariff as well as the program graduation, as well as the recently the Middle Eastern conflicts. All these things are creating its own issues to be needed in an arbitration table to resolve. Otherwise, I'm very thankful and congratulate Dr. Ashik because he has diagnosed the actual health of our economy, global economy, and the influence by the global economy at this particular, at this 12 hours of today. What we are now, we are at a very critical stage, and every morning I think that we must concern Mr. Donald Trump before talking today, because every time he's changing his strategy and we are being involved. So thanks again to Ashik that he has given very comparative positions of economic indicators, particularly with our neighboring economies. For example, the Sri Lankan economy, you know, about 6 years ago, they were at a very deep stranded positions, but now they have come up. I have seen that the NPL and other positions or the rate or other things. The comparative position of Sri Lanka is very, very much improving, but we are going to the very critical stages. So I think we have to identify the reasons or try of the ways how we can come out of this. I have taken the word the self-inflicted. That is the main problem of our economy at this stage. Even after 1971, we have had done so many self-inflicted institutional problems that we could not cope up with those problems. So we have to identify and we have to take care of the self-inflicted problems or challenges we are creating. So after this, I think I would also like to talk speak in Bengali because the understanding of media people, they are very important spokesman or analyzer of situation. আমরা যেটা মনে করছি যে এই মুহূর্তে একটি নতুন গণতান্ত্রিক সরকার 2 মাস মাত্র পার করেছে, অনেক প্রত্যাশা আমাদের তৈরি হয়েছিল এবং স্বাভাবিক ছিল যে অন্তর্বর্তীকালীন সরকারের পরে যে গণতান্ত্রিক সরকারটি আসবে, নতুন সরকারটি আসবে, তারা এই সকল সমস্যাগুলোকে ঠিক মতন বোর্ডলি, যেটা জাহিদ সাত্তার সাহেব করেছেন, যে বোর্ডলি করতে পারবার সক্ষমতা রাখেন তারাই। তো তাদের দিকে আমরা তাকিয়ে আছি। 2 মাস মাত্র সময়, সময়টা যথেষ্ট না, আর একটু দেখার ব্যাপার আছে। কিন্তু মর্নিং শোজ দ্য ডে বলে একটা কথা আছে। বিশেষ করে আমাদের যে সবচেয়ে বড় দুর্বল পজিশনটা হচ্ছে আমাদের ইকোনমিক সেক্টর, ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল সেক্টর। সেখানে যেসব পদক্ষেপগুলো আবার ইঙ্গিতে পাওয়া যাচ্ছে বা বোঝা যাচ্ছে, তাতে যথেষ্ট সতর্কতা অবলম্বনের, যথেষ্ট ক্রিটিক্যাল হওয়ার অবকাশ কিন্তু তৈরি হয়েছে। আমি মনে করি আজকের আমাদের এই মিটিং এ এই আজকের এই এখান থেকে এটাই বড় মেসেজ যে উই হ্যাভ হ্যাড clearly identified the core issue of this problem. তো সুতরাং ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল সেক্টরের দিকেই আমার মনে হয় বেশিভাবে আমাদের নজর দিতে হবে, কারণ এখান থেকেই আমাদের ব্যক্তিগত বিনিয়োগ বা আমাদের দ্রব্যমূল্য নিয়ন্ত্রণের যে পরিস্থিতি, কিংবা আমাদের আরো অন্যান্য যে বহিরঙ্গের বাইরের যে সমস্ত সমস্যা আসছে সেগুলো মোকাবেলা করা হবে। এটা হচ্ছে প্রথম হচ্ছে আমাদের হতে হবে আত্মপ্রত্যয়ী, আত্মবিশ্বাসী এবং আত্মসংগঠনের বাইরের থেকে ঝড়ঝাপটা আসবে, কিন্তু আমি কিভাবে সেটা মোকাবেলা করছি সেখানে আমি কি আসবো। যেমন এখানে আমরা খুবই স্পষ্টভাবে বলতে পারি যে ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল সেক্টর, বিশেষ করে রেভিনিউ সেক্টরে যে যে সংস্কারের কথাটা বলা হচ্ছে, মনে করা হচ্ছে যেন যেটা আইএমএফ বলছে তাই করছে, আসলে না। কিন্তু এটা আমার নিজের প্রয়োজন, আমার নিজের প্রয়োজনে আমার নিজের সংস্কার দরকার। এটা আইএমএফ বলুক আর না বলুক, আইএমএফ যদি বলে যে আপনি এইভাবে চুল আসলাবেন, এইভাবে করবেন, তাহলে আর আমার আর প্রতিদিন আমার আর নিজের স্বাস্থ্য সম্পর্কে আর চিন্তা ভাবনা কিছু থাকে না। তো রেভিনিউ খাতের ব্যাপারে এখানে আইডেন্টিফাইড হয়েছে খুব ভালোভাবেই, যে দেখা যাচ্ছে যে রেভিনিউ টার্গেট হচ্ছে না, টাকা পাচ্ছি না, সেই টাকা না পেলে আমাকে লোন করতে হবে, লোন চাপাতে হবে। এই যে পরস্পর প্রযুক্ত যে সমস্যাটা, এটা থেকে বেরিয়ে আসার জন্যই কিন্তু সিরিয়াসলি ভাবা হয়েছিল বা ভাবা হচ্ছে যে আমাদের যে রেভিনিউ আর্নিং, এখানে মোস্তফা গ্রুপের পার্টিকুলার সেক্টরের কথা বলেছেন শিপিং এর, সেখানে উনি বলেছেন যে আগে যে আমরা এটা দিয়েছিলাম ট্যাক্স ফি, যে এটা ছিল সেটা উঠে দিয়ে এখন 28% হয়েছে। কম্পেয়ার করেছেন ভারতের সাথে বা আমাদের দেশের সাথে। এরকম প্রতিটা সেক্টরে আমাদের খুব ডিপলি ভাবতে হবে যে কোথায় কোথায় আমরা নিজেরা ভুল করছি কিংবা বর্তমানে করছি বা কিছু করছি। সেই জন্যই কিন্তু এই যে রেভিনিউ সেক্টরের যে সংস্কারের ব্যাপারটা, আমি একটা কমিটিতে ছিলাম, আমরা ডক্টর জাইদি সত্তারের নেতৃত্বে ইকোনমিস্টের একটা খুব শক্তিশালী একটা গ্রুপ, ওনারাও ওনাদের রিপোর্টটা দিয়েছেন, আমরা আমাদের রিপোর্টটা দিয়েছি। সেই রিপোর্টের থেকে এইটা দেখা দরকার যে ওই রিপোর্টে যে সমস্ত ওয়ে আউট সংস্কার যা বলা হয়েছে সেগুলো একদিনই করা যাবে না, একদিনে হবেও না। এটা আস্তে আস্তে শুরু করতে হবে। ইউ হ্যাভ টু স্টার্ট এনি পয়েন্ট। আপনি ওই ব্লিডিং হতে থাকলে, ও যেটা বললেন আমার ব্লিডিং হতেই আছে, ব্লিডিং হতে গেলে আমি যদি না থামাই তাহলে একটা সময় তো আমি সাকাম করবো। তো সেইটা দিকে যাওয়ার আগে এই রেভিনিউ আমরা দিয়েছি, সাজেশন দিয়েছি, এগুলো কিন্তু আমরা নিজেরা দেই। আমরা কিন্তু এই সকল স্টেক হোল্ডারের সাথে 2-3 বার করে বক্তব্য নিয়ে লিখিত ভাবে সাজেশন নিয়ে আমরা এটা দিয়েছি। এখন এটা দেখা দরকার। এখন এখানে আমি এই জন্যই প্রাইভেট সেক্টরকে বা আমাদের ইন্টেলিজেন্সিয়া বা আমরা এই যে রিসার্চ অর্গানাইজেশনের আমাদের দায়িত্ব হচ্ছে কি, যে এইটাকে বলা, সিরিয়াসলি বলা যে আপনি এই সমস্যাটা করেন, কারণ এটা আমার জন্য, এটা আপনি কারোর জন্য বা কারোর কথা শুনিয়ে বা কারোর কোনো কারণে বা কোনো একটা ব্যাপারে আমি এটা আইএমএফ এর শর্তটা মানার জন্য আমি এটা এইভাবে করছি সেইভাবে করছি, এইভাবে বলার দরকার নেই। ইউ হ্যাভ টু স্টার্ট, ইউ হ্যাভ টু টেক ইট, এবং তাহলে ক্রমান্বয়ে পরিস্থিতিটা উন্নতি হবে। এবং সেই দিকেই মনে হয় বেশি করে, কারণ আমাদের সব দিকের উপরে লক্ষ্য রাখতে হবে ইকোনমির যারা প্লেয়ার, অর্থাৎ এই জনগণ, সাধারণ মানুষ, তাদের আস্থাটা যেন বৃদ্ধি পায়, তারা যেন দেখতে পায় যে হ্যাঁ অন্যায়কারী সত্যি অন্যায় বিচার হচ্ছে এবং তার অন্যায় করলে এটার থেকে মুক্তি নাই। সেখানে যদি আমি কোন একটা আইনের ভিতরে 18 ধারা যুক্ত করে দিয়ে, মগরিবের রক্তের সময় যে যুক্ত করে দিয়ে আমি সেখানে যদি এরকম একটা ধারণা দিয়ে দেই যে না এটা এইভাবে হচ্ছে না, তাহলে এটা শুধু অনলি ওই পার্টিকুলার বিষয়টা না, আমি মনে করি আমার গোটা জাতি, গোটা আমানতকারী, গোটা বিজনেস কমিউনিটি যারা ব্যাংক থেকে লোন নিয়ে ব্যবসা করে, তাদের সকলের যদি একটা প্রচন্ড চপেটাঘাত হবে যে তাহলে কোন দিকে যাচ্ছে। সুতরাং এই ব্যাপারগুলো আমার মনে হয় সকলকেই সময় দেওয়া উচিত, দেখা উচিত। এবং এই চারিদিক থেকে আমি মনে করি যেমন আমরা যে সমস্ত সংস্কারের কথা বললাম, এগুলো তো বিভিন্ন সেক্টর থেকেও কথা বলতে উচিত যে আমার এইটা দেন, আমাকে এটা দেন, এটা দিতে হবে। আরেকটা পয়েন্ট হচ্ছে যে সেক্টরে তারা যে মানি লন্ডার বা ওটা বলা হলো, তারা কোনো সেক্টরে, সেই সেক্টর থেকেও তো একটা কথা উঠতে হবে যে এর বিচার হওয়া উচিত বা এর হওয়া উচিত। আপনারা কিচ্ছু করবেন না, শুধু সরকার নিজে আইন তৈরি করে তার সাথে ফাইট করবেন, করতে যাবেন, সরকার জনপ্রিয়তার একটা ভয় থাকবেন, তারপরে তার আরো অনেক ধরনের সমস্যা থাকবে। এটা আমি মনে করি আমাদের সমগ্র জাতিকে, সকলকে, সকল পক্ষকে এই ব্যাপারে একটা ঐকমত্যে থাকতে হবে যে আমরা ভুল পথে যাবো না, যেতে পারবো না বা যাওয়া উচিত হবে না, ঠিক হবে না। এই দাবিটা শুধুমাত্র থিঙ্ক ট্যাঙ্ক থেকে তুললাম আর সরকার নিজের থেকেই ব্যবস্থা নিতে গেলেন, এটা তো ওই হবে না। এখানে পাবলিক সাপোর্ট প্রয়োজন হবে, ওই সেক্টরের প্রয়োজন হবে। যে সেক্টরে যিনি হয়তো মানি লন্ডারিং করেছেন সেই সেক্টরের থেকেও কথা বলতে হবে, সেই সেক্টর শুধু আমার কাছে বলবে যে আমার ফ্যাসিলিটিস দেন, আমি বাঁচতেছি না, আমার টিকে থাকতেছি না, কিন্তু আপনার এই সেক্টরের ক্ষতিটা যে করেছে তার সম্বন্ধে তো আপনাকে ভয়ে উঠতে হবে। কারণ নইলে দুদিন পরে আবার তো তাকে আপনারা আমরা 2008 সালে তাদেরকে খুব আইডেন্টিফাই করেছিলাম অনেক কিছু, দেখা গেল তারা এসে পরে আপনারা তাদেরকে ওয়েলকাম করেছেন এবং তারা সুতরাং এই সেলফের থেকে আমার মনে হয় আমাদের সকলকেই বেরিয়ে আসা উচিত। আমি এই কাহিনীগুলো আজকে আলোচনার সাথে অতটা হয়তো প্রাসঙ্গিক হবে না, কিন্তু তারপর এগুলো সকলকে
পরিষ্কার কথা যেটা হচ্ছে সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমাদের এই সরকারি মৌলিক সংস্কার, বিশেষ করে ট্যাক্স এরিয়াতে আমাদের করতেই হবে। এটা IMF এর বিষয় না, এটা আমাদের বিষয়। এটা এভাবে আমাদের we have to own it and it's absolutely essential। এবং আমরা যাদের আমাদের হিস্টোরিক্যাল মেমোরি একটু আছে, আমাদের চিফ গেস্ট এবং আমাদের মেমোরি একটু বেশি আছে হিস্টোরিক্যাল মেমোরি। আমি দেখেছি যে 1991 যখন একটা ডেমোক্রেটিক গভর্নমেন্ট এসেছিল পাওয়ারে, তারা যে ধরনের ড্রাস্টিক মেজার, ড্রাস্টিক রিফর্মস করতে পেরেছে, একদম ইকোনমির যে ডিরেকশন চেঞ্জ করতে পেরেছে, ওরকম আমার মনে হয় একটা সুযোগ এসছে এত বছর পরে। অনেক কোনো রিফর্ম হয়নি গত 15-20 বছর ধরে, আমরা বহু বলে এসেছি কোনো রিফর্ম হয়নি। আশা করছিলাম এই নতুন গভর্নমেন্ট, নিউ ডেমোক্রেটিক গভর্নমেন্ট will have that gumption, that power and that commitment, make some drastic change of direction in the economy এবং tax system একেবারে absolute requirement হয়ে গেছে, absolutely essential national imperative সেটাকে আমরা বলছি। So এটা না করলে মানে we don't have a way of that. We can't go back to the 7% growth rate, 8% growth rate in Bangladesh economy has the potential to grow. আচ্ছা, আমাদের এখানে এবার আমরা ওপেন ফ্লোর ডিসকাশন করতে চাই। I'd like to recognize we have the international, of course, Clinton is there, he's our patron, and Australian High Commission, he's always there. We have UNDP's I would say Chief Economic Advisor, Mr. O.S. Perey. We have country representative of Asia Foundation, and we have the Singapore High Commissioner here. And Deputy High Commissioner, we have a representative from the World Bank, we have a representative from the World Food Program, and so on. So we have a very, and I mean, even though আপনারা সবাইকে not ignoring you, we have BBS, we have members from the press and many other things. So you're all recognized. Okay, but now let's come to floor discussion. Should I invite somebody or we have some raised hands? Everybody.
Sanim.
You're from Sanim?
Yes, sir. I am MD Rajiv. Currently, I'm MD Rajiv. Currently, I am working as a research associate at South Asian Network on Economic Modeling, Sanem. Thank you, PRI, for arranging such a wonderful and timely event.
মাইক্রোফোনটা কাজ করছে না, অন করতে হবে।
We can hear you. বলেন Ashikur.
আচ্ছা, PRI কে আমি প্রথমে ধন্যবাদ এরকমের একটি মানে সময় মানে organizing such a wonderful and timely event on the current macroeconomic situation in Bangladesh. But the presentation did not include any concrete policy recommendation how to mitigate energy crisis. That's one of the finding I prepared. তো আমরা নর্মালি কি দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে বাংলা যে কোনো আমাদের যে প্রিভিয়াস গভর্নমেন্ট গুলো ছিল সবাই নর্মালি কি করে এনার্জি শক আসলে দেন এইটা নিয়ে কথা বলে, কিন্তু আগে থেকে আমরা কেউ প্রিপেয়ার থাকি না। রাশিয়া ইউক্রেন যুদ্ধের সময় আমরা দেখতে পেলাম যে আমাদের এনার্জি শক ছিল ট্রিমেন্ডাসলি হাই, সেটার ইম্প্যাক্ট আমরা এখনো পারসিস্ট করছে আমাদের ইকোনমি। ইনফ্লেশন ডাবল ডিজিটে চলে গেছিল, সেটা এখন এক্সিস্ট করতেছে। ওই সময় কি সরকার কোনো মানে পলিসি নিয়েছিল যেটাতে আমরা ইজিলি রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জিতে ট্রানজিশন করতে পারি, বা ওরকমের যে আমার যে এনার্জি সোর্সের যে ইম্পোর্টটা ছিল ওই বাস্কেটকে আমরা ডাইভার্সিফাইড করতে পারছি, করতে পারি না। স্টিল গভর্নমেন্ট কি মানে সরকার, বর্তমান সরকারও কি এনাফ পলিসি ইনিশিয়েটিভ নিয়েছে? এখনো আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে শক আসলো, দেন আমরা পলিসি নিলাম, এই পলিসিটা কয়েকদিনের মধ্যেই শেষ। এই রিসেন্টলি গভর্নমেন্ট অ্যানাউন্স যে সরকার আনইউজ যে ল্যান্ড গুলো আছে, লাস্ট আমি যদি চিন্তা করি লাস্ট 3-4 বছরে যদি আমরা প্রপার পলিসি নিতাম তাহলে রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জি ট্রানজিশন আমরা পর্যাপ্ত করতে পারতাম। এখন গভর্নমেন্ট এসে 16 তারিখে অ্যানাউন্স করলো যে আনইউজ ল্যান্ড গুলা আমি এখন সোলারের জন্য ইউজ করব। সেগুলো কি আগে ইউজ করা দরকার ছিল না? আমরা তো জানি যে সব আসতেছে তখনই আমরা ইউজ করতেছি, ঠিক আছে। আমাদের ইভেনচুয়ালি রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জি ট্রানজিশনের ক্ষেত্রে আমাদের অনেক অনেক সমস্যা। ফাইন্যান্সিং একটা ইস্যু, ট্যাক্স স্ট্রাকচার একটা ইস্যু। ফাইন্যান্সিং এর ক্ষেত্রে আমরা দেখতে পাই যে বলতেছে যে ফাইন্যান্সিং এর ক্ষেত্রে একটা কমন সমস্যা হচ্ছে ইকুয়াল যে লোন প্রসিডিউর দেয় সেটার ক্ষেত্রে স্মল যে প্রজেক্ট গুলো আছে, স্মল রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জি প্রজেক্টে কোনো এরকমের আমরা ইজিলি লোন পাই না। আবার নর্মাল অন্য প্রজেক্টের ক্ষেত্রে ইকুয়াল লোন প্রসিডিউরটা আছে সেটাও খুবই কমপ্লেক্স, সেক্ষেত্রে আমরা তো ইজিলি ট্রানজিশন করতে পারবো না রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জিতে। আর একটা প্রবলেম হচ্ছে যে আমাদের ট্যাক্স স্ট্রাকচার, আমরা সরকার বলে যে আমরা ইম্পোর্ট ডিউটি উঠাই ফেলছি রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জিতে, কিন্তু বাস্তবতা কি? বাস্তবতা আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে শুধু সোলার প্যানেলের ক্ষেত্রে
কোনো প্রশ্ন আছে?
একটু শর্ট
ওকে স্যার, সোলার প্যানেলের ক্ষেত্রে 1% ডিউটি, বাট অন্য যে রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জি কম্পোনেন্ট গুলো আছে ওগুলোতে 60%। এভাবে তো আর আমার রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জি ট্রানজিশন করা সম্ভব না। তো আমার যেটা দরকার, তো প্রপার প্ল্যানিং দরকার, সেটা এক্সিকিউশন দরকার। শুধু যে আমার শখ আসলো তখন আমি কিছু ইনিশিয়েটিভ নিলাম, শখ শেষ আমি এগুলো ভুলে গেলাম, তাহলে বাংলাদেশের রিনিউয়েবল এনার্জি ট্রানজিশন আরো 50 বছর হবে না। থ্যাংক ইউ এভরিওয়ান।
Right. Invite voice, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sattar. I like the title Chief Economist, but my real title is not as impressive. It's Country Economic Advisor. But thank you very much. Allow me to make one broad comment and then I'll get to a specific question. Broad comment, I mean, indeed, we are living in a world of heightened uncertainty, polycrisis, as has been described, perma-crisis. We have all these new terms to describe the world that we are living in. And we are facing yet another crisis. Of course, we didn't talk about another crisis which is lurking out there. There's the climate crisis. And that also, of course, has impact on the economy. And then there's this technological disruption. And amidst all these crises, I'm not so sure we'll be able to adequately respond to a rapidly changing theme as far as technology is concerned, and that has implications as well. But I think when countries face all these crises, there might be a tendency of looking inwards, which I believe is the wrong thing to do. In fact, many of the problems that we face requires a multilateral effort. In fact, we need more globalization, more global cooperation, rather than looking at more inwards, how we protect ourselves. Having said that, I wanted to sort of add to what my colleague from Salim said, and you talked about many of these reforms, the urgency of carrying out these reforms. Many are structural reforms that Bangladesh needs to move on to the next sort of level of economic growth. And I think Dr. Zaidi, you mentioned there's huge potential for the Bangladeshi economy. But I was wondering in the short term, and some of the numbers are indeed worrying, the drop in exports. I haven't looked at the breakdown of sectors that cater primarily to the domestic market. With all these challenges, supply shock crisis, what can government do in the short term to stimulate demand and make sure that both the export sector as well as production, which is tied to jobs, how those can be protected? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, different World Food Program.
No, sir, I am from Bangladesh Polytechnic Institute.
From the BFTI. Okay.
Thank you, PRI. Thank you, guys.
You know that energy is the lifeblood of the economy. Now energy security is the main concern for Bangladesh. I have just a simple question. Is Bangladesh capable of buying low cost fuel from the international market? What India does. Actually, energy cost is as a great impact on inflation, high cost production, transport costs, cost of living. But for our preparation, for our initiative to buy low cost crude oil from the international market. Number two, it's high time to bring back the trust of the citizen, the trust of the private sector. Of course, how? How we can bring back the trust of the citizen, the trust of the private sector? LDC graduation is knocking our door. What are our status? Our preparation to combat the LDC graduation challenges. So, thank you, PRI. It is high time to find out the best possible way to handle these challenges. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I invite our Deputy High Commissioner from Singapore to share some of his perspective? We're all looking at Singapore for.
Well, no, I actually don't really have much to say because this is primarily a presentation on the, Bangladesh economy, but
How is Singapore handling it?
how Singapore's handling the current global situation, I think we've always been far-sighted and we've always looked at things from a long-term perspective, and we've saved up a lot of money over the years, so we've prepared for a situation like this. In terms of oil reserves, we have it in legislation, which maybe is a learning point for Bangladesh, that your energy supply companies, or your energy companies that are providing to the grid, for Singapore, they are mandated to keep 3 months supply. So we always have 3 months. Beyond that, the government actually has done underground storage caverns in Singapore, which our a couple of ministers recently visited to, calm the nerves in Singapore. So we have something like 5 of these big caverns, and the height of the depth of the cavern is something they said was 9 stories, was equivalent to a 9-story building. So some estimates say we have maybe between 6 months to a year's supply of energy, which is quite decent, I think, for but we have to think of this long term. Our oil refinery processing capabilities were developed since the 1970s. Singapore was independent only in 1965. So we already were thinking then that energy is going to be a big thing. We don't produce any energy actually. So we don't have any oil underground. So
Now you have.
by collecting, and I think your small everyone out there queuing up for fuel right now is doing the same thing informally, right? Yeah, so you got to do it collectively. It makes more sense, obviously. So I think I'm thinking as a layman, but these are some of the things I wanted to share.
It's great. Yeah, thank you. So basically what we understand is this Gulf War is basically about an oil crisis.
Yes.
1970s, there was an oil crisis.
Yes.
Maybe this is even more serious than the 1970s.
You're right. Yeah. And I think our oil refining.
Everybody is looking at what is the result that you have. China built up, 6 months. Now you're saying 3 months reserve is.
3 months was
3 months reserve.
Well, 3 months was mandated for our energy companies to keep. But of course, beyond that, our government is has underground facilities and of course we yeah.
After this war, I think all countries will start planning out.
It's a bit like COVID, right? COVID, some people didn't have the capacity to produce masks and all that, and then everyone started hoarding.
So more uncertainty in the world.
Yeah.
Greater the incentive to pile up oil reserve, which means the price of oil is going to keep at this level even well after the end of the war.
Most likely.
Mr. Faisal bin Siraj of the Country Representative Asia Foundation.
No, it was a wonderful presentation. I just had a serious flashback when Dr. Rashid mentioned about how the economy was doing well till 2018-19 and then had a dip. And that resonates with, and perhaps it's more like a closing the loop between economic affairs and social impact. And we also have been doing this people's perception survey for quite a long time. And if you look at the data, particularly on people's optimism about the country, you can see that there is a sharp turnaround also around 2018 and 19 when people actually started having very, very negative outlook or perception of a negative outlook about the country.
Asia Foundation,
Yeah.
done those.
And also supported by DFAT and also in partnership with PIGD. And you can see there's a clear correlation between how economy and ultimately, of course, we had it culminated. We cannot draw causation or correlation, but we know there was a big event that happened immediately after. Both of the data shows a certain direction that doesn't look very, very well. So just wanted to share that, like how, and now that maybe the political resiliency through a democratic government is an optimistic thing, a good thing, but without reform, without particular interventions that all the speakers mentioned about, I think it's just a good learning to have, like how people's perception can switch to something very, very grimy and yeah, we don't want another crisis also in the social and political sector. Thank you.
Thank you. এখান থেকে কেউ বলবেন?
আপনি হাত তুলেছিলেন না?
ও আচ্ছা আচ্ছা। Assalamualaikum, very good. This is Dr. Faisal. I'm an exam faculty in the Department of Economics, South University. Also, I have a think tank policy house. It's a very wonderful presentation today. And actually, I was waiting for this program today because after this election, this is the first time we organize this event. Actually, I would like to give a brief background of the contractionary monetary policy that Bangladesh is going to continue since 2023. And you see, after the mass uprising, it was also continued, and it raised the policy rate up to 10%. And the reason was this policy rate hike and the contractionary monetary policy was to contain inflation. But what we see at the beginning, inflation was coming down, but it's again rising up. So we can say that contractionary monetary policy could not really function very well in the case of Bangladesh. But on the other hand, if you look at the private sector and the economic activities, that is actually really messed up. And there are many businessmen who are saying that at the rate of like 14 or 15% interest rate, it's very difficult to continue business in the country. So with this failing situation, what do you think that how long Bangladesh should continue this contractionary monetary policy, and what should be done in the next 6 or 10 months or in a year? Thank you very much. Well, very challenging question. How long can you continue with this contractionary monetary policy? At least our keynote presenter has said that we have to continue with this, at least the policy rate. There's no scope for the policy rate to go down at this time. I doubt if anybody would say that he has shown that the real policy rate is actually very low, much lower than what it has been in Sri Lanka or perhaps in India. No way. So that's a very bad choice for the country. I hope the private sector, our chief guest today might have something to say on that. How does the private sector feel with such a high policy rate? But I don't think the private sector looks at the real policy rate, which is the nominal policy rate adjusted for inflation, which is what economists tend to look at. So, we still have, another 5 minutes or so. Now, last question, I think. Then we will like to hear. Oh, okay. So I'm sorry. Looking at the program, I think we have. So, I think we should pass on to our special guest for his remarks.
Great. Thank you so much to our chief guest and everybody that's joined us here today. It's always the highlight of my week, coming here to hear from all of the debonair economists at PRI, as well as the private sector. And everyone else. Now, I always start out when I come here with these really beautifully crafted remarks. And then as the conversation goes on, the neurons start firing and I start scribbling on my remarks. And then I end up with the world's most complicated flowchart with colors and notes and numbers connecting my thoughts in very abstract ways. So if I flounder, that's completely on me. But look, I should say, this edition of the monthly macroeconomic site is number 11, if I'm not mistaken, which has been a terrific addition, I think, to the discourse here in Bangladesh. And this one, I think, is particularly timely. It's always vital to have that kind of real-time intel, real-time data, and real-time analysis and policy responses, given all of the shocks that have been described here today. As been noted, a lot of the challenges now that the newly elected government are inherited. They didn't occur in the last month. And they've been described pretty well. I don't think I really need to rehash them, but the persistently high inflation, low foreign direct investment, low domestic revenue mobilization, vulnerability to the financial sector. So it sort of goes on. But I think what I really enjoyed from today's discussion again is that honest take of the problems of the now in the kind of very relevant historical perspective. And that is around this kind of defining underlying growth rate that Bangladesh has benefited from. It's kind of for a long time has had this machine, this 6% growth machine that just churns away in the background, and you have good years and you have bad years. But really, it has driven, I think you could say, a post-independence economic miracle if you look from where Bangladesh started to where it is today. And I think in large part, that machine is powered by the kind of work ethic and the entrepreneurial spirit of the Bangladesh people. So look, to some extent, you have to acknowledge that governments have been a beneficiary of the machine. They haven't necessarily been the architect of that machine. And we can't assume that machine will run like that forever, right? The shocks are, of course, very important, but we have to contend with the idea that maybe it's not a 6% machine anymore. Maybe it's a 5% machine. Maybe it's a 4% machine. Maybe it is trending down and it hasn't found its bottom yet. This is, in some ways, not unexpected. There has been talk around self-inflicted wounds, and I think there's always policy mistakes. But it is also, a fact of life for countries in this stage of development as you become a middle-income country. That those underlying growth pushes do decline and the constraining forces come to dominate. And so you can't coast anymore. And then what really separates countries that and become trapped in the middle income trap and those that power through it is policy decisions. Very hard policy decisions, actually. But the countries that can take those hard policy decisions are the ones that power through to achieve developed country status. And so, those hard decisions then is really, yes, deal with the shocks, but recognize that we have structural problems and we require structural solutions, right? And then I think that's been a big part of the conversation today and very comprehensively covered. So again, I won't rehash, but while I've got the floor, I'll take an indulgence as an economist, just to touch on two of them. One, I suppose, when we're thinking about shocks, is just to recognize that often shocks expose pre-existing vulnerabilities, right? Because shocks are going to happen, and what you do before the shock happens defines how you deal with it. And so, in the case of the energy shock here, there are policy decisions that Bangladesh, if they had made in the past, would be better situated to deal with today. Which Mitchell, I think, gave some examples of Singapore. Singapore was, I think, an outlier of how well it deals with shocks, to be honest. but again, I think that's a really important principle. But then we're standing here in 2026. We can't go back to 2015. We can't go back to 2005. And so, the other thing I would say there, it's a very common saying amongst economic policymakers in Australia, that maybe the rest of the world, is never let a good crisis go to waste, right? And so we have a crisis, the crisis gets attention, particularly in the energy sector. And so now is the time, hopefully, to build in that stronger policies to underpin Bangladesh's economic security. And we've had some examples of, obviously stockpiles are great, but they're not the only thing. I think where I look at where Japan is right now, and I think Singapore too, actually benefiting from Australia, is they've locked in long-term LNG prices exporting from Australia, much below current market price and miles below the spot rate. And where unfortunately Bangladesh is now, it's on the worst market you want to be, is the spot market. You don't want to be on the spot market right now. So that's one thing, but obviously diversifying where you get your energy from, then also utilising the great resources Bangladesh actually has. I mean, as far as I know, there haven't really been much exploration or exploitation of resources here in sort of decades, right? And then the last one, obviously, is that shift towards renewables, which Australia's on that journey. Bangladesh needs to be on that journey as well. The other one, I guess I just wanted to talk briefly about is on the kind of trade and competitiveness and the importance that is going to have in Bangladesh, reducing regulatory and trade constraints in particular to really unlock the private sector, private investment and job creation. That's where growth comes from. And the policies, in this case, they're already here, right? Like a lot of this is already in Bangladesh's existing national tariff policy, which recommends, rationalizing tariffs and removing non-tariff barriers, trying to remove anti-export bias where it exists. But beyond that, I guess you're forced to look at your trade policy because you're facing obviously graduation, and you're forced to look at it because you're entering into negotiation with a number of countries around the world. But ultimately, that shouldn't, from the economic technocrat in me says that should not be the driver. Like, it's somewhat of an unfashionable belief to hold in the modern world, but all the evidence suggests that tariffs primarily hurt the country imposing them, not anybody else, right? And so lowering tariffs will have a transition cost, but lowering tariffs, all the evidence we have of the last sort of 50 years of economics suggests that lowering tariffs is going to drive economic growth, and that should be the underpinning principle of your trade policy, not adapting to LDC graduation and all these other things. Now, that's again is not less commonly sort of accepted, I think, in the modern world. And I graduated from economics many years ago. I'm not sure if there was an economic textbook that's been published since I graduated that suggests that tariffs can drive growth. That might be the case, but I haven't seen it. So there, I'll stop kind of there. But I do want to say, again, express support for the work PRI is doing and all of the think tanks in Bangladesh, and we try and support a number of them. Some names here today have done some really wonderful work mapping out impacts of the energy crisis on Bangladesh's economy, which is very, very valuable. Likewise, Australia still stands ready to support Bangladesh's economic reform priorities. We have specific funding directed towards the World Bank, who's working in very close collaboration with Bangladesh government, and I hope they continue to do so. And finally, just that we continue to be committed to growing the trade and investment relationship between Bangladesh and Australia for the prosperity of both of our countries. So I'll stop there and thank all of our guests today. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good to have economists in the Australian High Commission and any other embassies who support our program, because we get a very good assessment of our state of the economy. Great. So before I pass on to our very respected chief guest, who I recognize as the doyen of the private sector in Bangladesh, I wanted to share just one particular idea of Bangladesh's growth record. Three features of this growth record. Number one is we don't have a negative growth ever. Okay? That means to say Bangladesh economy doesn't have a recession in any particular. Even in the COVID crisis when Indian economy went negative and other economies went negative, Bangladesh still had a growth rate of 3.5%. That's one. Number two, every decade, the average growth rate of Bangladesh has risen by about 1%. It started with about 3.5% in the 1980s, 4.8% in the 1990s, and every other decade until 2019, it was 1% higher. But now, this 2021 to, I don't know, 30, we're having a problem. We don't, and so far we haven't got that extra 1% aspect as yet. And the other thing is the stability of the growth. Up to 2019, growth rate was not volatile. So rising and stable growth, that's the future of Bangladesh. I think that's an important point to make always. Now I have the great pleasure and honor and privilege to invite our chief guest, Mr. Mahbubur Rahman, who is the president, who's been the president for the International Chamber of Commerce Bangladesh for a very long time, as far as I can remember. And the floor is yours, Mr. Mahbubur Rahman. And please share your understanding and assessment of the state of the economy and the policies that are being addressed or used to address the state of the economy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. To me, it appears that I am the only non-economist here in this session. You are also? Yeah. No, that's the two of us. the two of us. The Clinton just has spoken. They are only economist in the embassy, in the High Commission of Australia. I think I met you before.
Yes, we have. Absolutely.
So, but here to me, it appeared that to some of you, maybe some already know, and some of you may not be knowing the ICC, International Chamber of Commerce. There is an International Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, but that is a local chamber. This International Chamber of Commerce is available in 177 countries around the world and came into being in 1918, immediately after First World War, not the Second World War. Immediately after First World War, but when there was no rules of business. So we call them merchant of peace. They started mobilizing the people together in order to have an international trade, have a more systematic progress in the worldwide. And thereafter, they have joined with the United Nations to prepare rules of business. Today's more than 60 to 70% of the rules of business in banking sector is all prepared by 100% prepared by ICC and those by the UN and adopted worldwide. We have, beyond that, we have our cooperation and engagement with G7, G20, World Bank, Asian Bank, and all other international banks together. And with this, the United Nations, we are the only non-sovereign organization has been given the position of a permanent observer in the United Nations General Assembly from 1916. We take pride that we have more than 47 million members worldwide, and every third workers in the world they are workers of the ICC. Every third workers belong to the ICC membership. Thank you very much for listening to me. So here I have a written text which I would like to read and then would like to comment on some of the issues that has been raised by our Dr. Ashikur. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished Chair, Dr. Zaidi Sattar, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very warm welcome to distinguished members, and of course the Chair has already welcomed you, and I would also like to say thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's a privilege to join you today. This important initiative of the Policy Research Institute, which they do every month, in order to show the way how the government should proceed and the economy should contribute to the nation. So I would like to say thank you once again for your kind invitation, and also in your leadership in shaping the evidence-based economic dialogue. That is very, very important to me, because very often than not, we go to comment and make our observation on a pre-start instead of making much of a research. So sometimes it also creates a confusion. At a time when the global economy is navigating heightened uncertainty, platforms like this are not only relevant, they are essential. The PRI. Ladies and gentlemen, the global economic landscape today is marked by the slowing growth, persistent inflationary pressures, and rising geopolitical risks. According to the International Monetary Fund, growth across emerging economies is moderating, while volatility in energy markets continues to create significant uncertainty. We are currently navigating a period of heightened macroeconomic stress shaped by the overlapping external shocks and structural constraints. Growth has softened with near-term outlook hovering around 4%, reflecting weak investment, declining exports, and energy-related disruptions. At the same time, inflation remains elevated at around 8.5 to 9%, eroding real incomes, increasing poverty pressures, and weakening domestic demand. From a business perspective, several critical trends are emerging. First, external sector pressures are intensifying. Exports have declined for several consecutive months due to weak global demand and rising competition, particularly in key markets like European Union. Meanwhile, rising energy import costs and ongoing Middle East disruptions are putting additional strain on the balance of payments and foreign exchange reserves. Second, fiscal and financial sector vulnerabilities remain a concern. Revenue mobilization remains low, limiting fiscal space for development spending. At the same time, structural weakness in the banking sector, including high non-performing loans, which nearing about 35%, and the governance challenges, not only in the banking sector alone, but in a number of other areas which are governing the entire economy. That's very, very important from that point of view. So, including high non-performing loans and governance challenges continue to constrain credit flow and private sector activities. Third, our trade competitiveness is being tested as we approach and receive valuation. The gradual erosion of preferential market access combined with uncertainties around global tariff regimes will require us to adapt quickly to a more competitive global environment. Ladies and gentlemen, at the same time, Bangladesh continues to demonstrate a strong underlying fundamentals. A large and dynamic workforce, a growing middle class, a resilient manufacturing base, and increasing integration into global value chain. What we are witnessing is a structural transition from a purpose-based economy to a rule-based, competitiveness-driven economy. This transition demands strategic policy responses. In this context, I would like to highlight 4 key priorities: strengthening the financial sector, ensuring transparency, sound governance, and capital adequacy to support sustainable investment; improving the business environment through regulatory predictability, policy consistency, and efficient dispute resolution mechanisms; enhancing trade facilitation and logistics, reducing costs and improving efficiency across ports, customs, and transport systems; investing in human capital and productivity, because skills and innovation will define long-term growth. Ladies and gentlemen, from the perspective of ICC Bangladesh, public-private dialogue remains the cornerstone of effective policy making. Forums like this bring together policymakers, researchers, and business leaders, creating a shared understanding of both challenges and solutions. This collaboration is especially critical as Bangladesh navigates a complex and triple transition post-disintegration realities. Global economic volatility and the pressing need for structural reforms. Let me conclude by saying this: Bangladesh stands at a critical economic juncture. The challenges are significant, but so are the opportunities. With disciplined macroeconomic management, credible reforms, and a strong institutional capacity, Bangladesh can reposition itself toward a more resilient, competitive, and inclusive growth trajectory. I commend PRI for this excellent initiative and wish the program every success. Thank you for your attention.
Very warm thank you to you, sir, for giving us this guidance. Two takeaways: yes, this is a crisis situation, but there are opportunities as well. We shouldn't forget about that. Bangladesh should also take these opportunities.
Oh. বাংলা কোনো অসুবিধা নেই, বাংলা তো আমার মাতৃভাষাতে বাংলাতে বলতেই পারি। তো আসলে সমস্যাটা হলো বর্তমান বাজারে ইকোনমি, দেশি বিদেশি সব ইকোনমির মধ্যে ওই শুধু ট্রাম্পই আছে। আপনি কি ট্রাম্প করে যাবেন নাকি ট্রাম্পে করে উঠবেন না যাবেন, এই সমস্যার মধ্যে আমরা পড়ে আছি। তো প্রতিদিন একটা না একটা সমস্যার মধ্যে আমরা আবর্তিত হচ্ছি, এবং এর মধ্যে যে 5টাই সমস্যার কথা যেটা আমাদের ডক্টর আশিক বললেন, যে আপনার যে কোভিড থেকে আমরা উঠে আসলাম, তারপর রাশিয়া ও ইউক্রেনের যুদ্ধ, ট্রাম্পের ট্যারিফ, গালফ ওয়ার এন্ড এনার্জি শক, এই এতগুলো জিনিস একসাথে। তো এইগুলো কোনোটাই বাংলাদেশ এর থেকে কোনো ইমিউন না, প্রত্যেকটার সাথেই বাংলাদেশ জড়িত আছে। তো এই অবস্থায় আমরা যদি সামনে এগোতে হয়, আমাদেরকে ওই নিজেদের পথ বেছে দিতে হবে। তবে একটা জিনিস হলো যে আমাদের দেশে আমরা প্রায়শ লক্ষ্য করেছি যে পলিটিক্স এন্ড বিজনেস কেন যেন পরস্পরভাবে প্যারালালি চলে। এটা শুধু দে শুড জয়েন টুগেদার। এখানে সরকার এন্ড ব্যবসা বাণিজ্য বা ব্যবসায়ী বা ইনভেস্টার্স শুড ওয়ার্ক টুগেদার। কিন্তু আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে কেন যেন there is a gap. কি কারণে আমি I do not know, but it should be breached. So that we can perhaps go for further investment. যে বর্তমানে বাংলাদেশের ইনভেস্টমেন্ট লোকাল ইনভেস্টার সে ইনভেস্ট করছে না, FDI কিভাবে আসবে? তো কেন ইনভেস্ট করছে না? একটু আগে আমাদের চেয়ারম্যান সাহেব বলছিলেন যে মেশিনারি ইম্পোর্ট কেন কমে গেছে। তো আমার যদি ইনভেস্টমেন্ট না থাকে মেশিনারি ইম্পোর্ট কেন করবো? তো অ্যাজ সাচ এই এমন করতে পারে না, এই সাহস নাই যে বিকজ সে দিয়ে আগামীকালকে যে গ্যাস পাবে কিনা, সে তার ইলেকট্রিসিটি পাবে কিনা, এইটা জিনিসটা নিয়ে তার কাছে যথেষ্ট দ্বন্দ্ব কাজ করে। এরপরে সে ব্যাংক ডিফল্টার হয়ে যাবে, ব্যাংকের থেকে সে পাবে না, বিভিন্ন জিনিস নিয়ে তার চিন্তা ভাবনা আছে। তারপরে হাউ দি পলিটিক্যাল গভর্নমেন্ট ইজ শেপিং দি ইকোনমি, দ্যাট ইজ অলসো ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট ফ্রম দ্যাট পয়েন্ট অফ ভিউ। এই জন্য আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে ব্যবসায়ীদের মধ্যে একটা দ্বিধাদ্বন্দ্ব এখনো কাজ করছে। সেই কারণে এটা কিন্তু পরাজিত না, আমাদের দেশের অর্থনীতির জন্য এটা কখনোই উচিত না, দে শুড গো ফরওয়ার্ড। কিন্তু এই ফরওয়ার্ড যাওয়ার জন্য একটু আগে বলতেছিল ম্যাগনা গ্রুপ যে আপনার শিপিং এর জন্য, শিপিং ব্যবসা বা জাহাজ ব্যবসার মধ্যে ওই তো এক সময় ছিল যে বাংলাদেশের শিপের মধ্যে কত পার্সেন্ট ক্যারি করতে হবে, দেয়ার ওয়াজ এ কন্ডিশন ছিল না? There was a condition that you will have to carry your import in a Bangladeshi vessel, Bangladeshi flag vessel, certain percentage. এটা ছিল, এখন আসে নাকি এটা?
WTO compliant না, সেটা উঠিয়ে দেওয়া হয়েছে।
But বাংলাদেশি ভেসেল কিন্তু ভেসেল না থাকে
14 বিলিয়নের মধ্যে আমরা 1 বিলিয়ন বাংলাদেশ ফ্ল্যাগ ইম্পোর্ট, মানে পয়েন্ট
ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্ট যে আমরা ওই জিনিসগুলা দেখতে হবে যে আমাদের সমস্ত কিছু সরকার এবং বেসরকারি খাত পরস্পর বিরোধী বা দুইটা পক্ষ, it is একটা বলে আর একটা ইন্টিগ্রেটেড পার্ট অফ দি হোল ইকোনমি। সো therefore আমি যেটা মনে করি যে সরকার এবং বেসরকারি খাত একসাথে এক হাতে মিলিয়ে সামনে এগোতে হবে। বর্তমান সরকার যেহেতু 2/3 মেজরিটি নিয়ে নতুন একটা এত বছরের মানে সন্দেহ এবং সন্দিহান অবস্থা থেকে আমরা বেরিয়ে এসেছি, তো অতএব এই সরকার they should work together hand in hand with the private sector in the days and years to come. তো আপনার ইয়েতে ইম্পোর্ট গ্রোথের জন্য আমার যেমন মানে এক্সপোর্ট যদি আমাকে বাড়াতে হয়, ইম্পোর্ট গ্রোথ করতে হবে। আমাদের বেশিরভাগ ক্ষেত্রে র মেটেরিয়ালস আমরা ইম্পোর্ট করে এক্সপোর্ট জন্য করি, এবং এক সময় তো ওই গার্মেন্টের প্রায় 80% মানে আমরা ইম্পোর্ট করতাম, তারপরে 20% ভ্যালু এডিশন। এখন তো মাশাআল্লাহ অনেক বেড়েছে না,
50%।
এখন কত 50% এর মতো হয়েছে। বাট নেভারদিলেস তো এক্সপোর্টে গত কয়েক মাসে যে এটা প্রায় 6-7 মাস বা 8 মাসের মতো মানে is going downward. It is not only the American tariff, but also American tariff এর পরেও আমেরিকাতে আমাদের এক্সপোর্ট বেড়েছিল। কিন্তু এটা কি হচ্ছে, I have no study on this. Possibly the government association, they may be able to give you. But why it is in the European Union? So as such, the European Union আমাদের এক্সপোর্ট কমে যাওয়া এটা কিন্তু যথেষ্ট চিন্তার বিষয়, এবং এই বিষয়ে we need to take মানে extra care. এবং পারসিস্টিং ইনফ্লেশন এইটা কিন্তু মানে আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে সোফার আমি যতটুকু মানে মনে করতে পারি যে এত লঙ্গার পিরিয়ড at such a high level of inflation আমার মনে ছিল না। তো এইটা কেন হলো, এবং এটা হওয়ার জন্য কোনো সময় আমরা নিজেরাও যেমন টাকা ছাপাইয়া যদি আপনি আপনার কাজ ছাড়ান তাহলে তো কিন্তু ইনফ্লেশন বাড়তে থাকবে। এটা ছাড়াও আর কি কারণে ইনফ্লেশনটাকে আমি কন্ট্রোলে আনতে পারছি না, এই জিনিসটা কিন্তু we should have to মানে take into consideration। কিন্তু এটা যদি এইভাবে চলতে থাকে তাহলে ওই marginal people will be marginalized এবং যেগুলো যে প্রভার্টি লেভেল যে এখানে নেমে এসছে, তো যেটা ছিল এক সময় আমরা বোধহয় 20% এসেছিলাম, এখন তো বোধ হয় ইট হ্যাজ গন আপ। এই অবস্থায় আমরা কিন্তু আরো একটু পিছনে পড়ে যাবো। From that point of view, আমি মনে করি যে we need to arrest this inflation by all means, এবং এই যে স্টেপগুলো নিতে হবে সেগুলো যাতে করে নতুন করে ইনফ্লেশন সৃষ্টি না হয় সেই জিনিসগুলো দেখতে হবে। পলিটিক্যাল কমিটমেন্টের কারণে অনেক সময় যদি আমরা বেশি খরচ করতে চাই তাহলে সেটাও আবার ইনফ্লেশনে যোগ হবে। IMF যে ধরনের কন্ডিশন যেটা বলতেছিলেন আমাদের ডক্টর Zaidi, the former chairman of the National Board of Revenue, যে IMF এর all conditions এবং ডক্টর Ashikur একই কথাই বলেছেন যে all conditions of IMF are not against Bangladesh. It is in order to improve the economy, in order to contribute towards the growth and development, তাদের সাজেশনস গুলো আছে। তো সেই জিনিসগুলো তো আমাদেরকে অবশ্যই লক্ষ্য রাখতে হবে। তো এই অবস্থায় ব্যাংকিং ইনডিসিপ্লিন যেটা মানে আপনারা তো সবাই জানেন যে কি অবস্থায় আমাদের ব্যাংকগুলো আছে, সরকারি ব্যাংকগুলো অলমোস্ট মানে না থাকার মতো অবস্থা। তো এই অবস্থায় যে আমাদের 5টা ইসলামিক ব্যাংক ওই যে মার্জ করা হয়েছিল, তো এইটা নাকি আবার পুরনো মালিকদের কাছে চলে যেতে পারবে। এই দ্বীপে 7% আপ মানে ইমিডিয়েট আপ কি বলে আপফ্রন্ট
35,000 কোটির 7%।
জি, 35,000 কোটির 7% এখন দিলে ওনারা এটা করতে পারবে না, আবার 2 বছরে দিলে। এখন যদি ওটা দেয় তারপরে 2 বছরের জায়গায় 20 বছরও হতে পারবে, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই। তো আমার কাছে মনে হয় কেন জানো, আমরা যে দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে এইটা ছাড়াও আরো 10টা মানে মার্জার হওয়ার প্রয়োজন আছে, যেগুলো অলরেডি মানে ইয়ে অবস্থা আছে, কিন্তু বাংলাদেশে যেহেতু এখন পর্যন্ত কোনো কি বলে ব্যাংক্রাপসি মানে ইয়ে হয় নাই, এনফোর্সমেন্ট হয় নাই। তো ব্যাংক্রাপসি যদি এনফোর্সমেন্ট করতে হয় তাহলে দেখা যাবে যে মানে আপনার অর্ধেক ব্যাংক থাকবে না, ইনক্লুডিং স্টেট ওড ব্যাংকস। তো সেই জন্য আমার কাছে মনে হয় যে we need to be very, very careful in taking our decision in the central bank. At the same time, the government should also plan in order to see that the economy does not suffer any further. So, energy constrained detailing investment যেটা আমি বললাম যে এনার্জি কনস্ট্রেন্ট থাকবে, আমরা যে গ্যাস এবং ইলেকট্রিসিটির জন্য আমরা বরাবর সরকারকে চাপ দিচ্ছি, এবং যেগুলো এক্সিস্টিং কোম্পানিজ গুলো আছে তারা সবার করছে, ফার্দার নিউ কোম্পানিজ আসার জন্য তো সাহস করছে না। Therefore, investment both local and foreign will be very difficult to come in. So আমি মনে করি যে আপনার এই বিষয়ে we need to interact and work together. সরকার এবং বেসরকারি খাতে policy makers and the think tanks and the private sector, trade bodies join together and to take the economy to its further level. And we have the potentials and we can do it.
Thank you. আপনার মেসেজ ঠিক আছে, প্রাইভেট সেক্টর এবং সরকার মিলিতভাবে কোঅর্ডিনেটেড মানে এই যে ডিফারেন্স না। ওকে, এবার আমি হ্যান্ড ওভার করে দিচ্ছি আমাদের কলিগ ডক্টর প্রফেসর খন্দকার।
Thank you, Chair. Respected Chief Guest, speakers. I think it's always difficult to talk at the back end of the workshop, which is so engrossing and also cover a lot of areas. So I try to be very brief, but I have some observations which I think I should present or ask. And I think to start with, like appear we take pride in terms of producing and also displacing MMI every month. It's not easy task because there are several problems in terms of getting data on time and also analyzing. But we're very happy that we have been able to do that for the last 11 months. I think MMI is not just a narrative of the what happened in the last 1 month or 2 months. It actually analyzes very deep inner insight of the issues, and also bring out very important issues for response and also possibly further research. I think this MLI also covered a lot of data, our areas, and it's also holistic forms. But I think the focus was more on the I rightly pointed out the very important issues like the graduation, US reciprocal tariff, and what but I think we have also shown that what are the channels of those and what could be estimated, and possibly in some cases conjecture cost to the economy in terms of the cost quite high in terms of trade cost, European cost, energy, and also coming back to the real economy on the growth and poverty. I think some issues I think came out like I was talking a bit like Dr. Sattar brought about new issues of new economic order, and also talked about the nexus between trade growth and also the output growth, which is quite interesting, and also providing some new insight into the overall external sector for Ashik's point on like the economic growth and the volatility of the economic growth is very interesting. I think we have the episodes of I mean more or less increasing growth for almost like 45 years, and then little bit of volatility. Now we have a reversal of that, where growth is coming down very soon and become much more volatile. I think possibly this calls for a more decomposition analysis of why this is happening in the growth story. Dr. Zaidi also provided a very interesting nexus between 3F, like the fuel, food, and fertilizer, and the implication of that, if this fuel price be elevated, it will have impact on CPI, inflation, food price, food security, and also food production in the case of Bangladesh. So this is also called for like what would be the new energy security policy in the case of Bangladesh. A lot of people talked about that. I think another issue that possibly we talked about, but we don't know that the population dividend in Bangladesh is actually running out. Like the population dividend comes into 3 different forms. First, demographic dividend, second, demographic dividend, and the gender dividend. I think in the first 2 fronts, we have not been able to reap the actual benefit that was given to us in terms of the natural the higher growth of labor over population growth. And I think my own estimate is that it will cease to exist after 2033 or the 34. I mean, we have already surpassed 75% of the opportunity that was naturally given to us. So this is another thing that is also important in that. I think the comparison between, I think we are a small open economy in terms of the trade literature. No? So what happened outside the world, we cannot actually control. But we are the recipient of those, all the development. I think the comparison with India, I know that we do a lot of comparison with India, is quite different. I mean, difficult, because India is a large economy. Possibly they have more leverage on the global front and the national front compared to Bangladesh. I think our comparison with Pakistan, a smaller economy, is much more alike, pertinent to me. The issue of delivery inflation is very pertinent issue. I think big question is that why it is elevated and keeps elevated at that level, like 8-9%, when you have inflation in our peer countries, 2 to 3%. So there's a 5% gap between Cambodian inflation and Bangladesh inflation, where they have like the tax GDP ratio of 21% and Bangladesh tax GDP ratio is 7%. The big question are there, what are the underlying cause of inflation in Bangladesh and the persistence of that one. So we don't have enough information, we don't have enough insight into that one. And I think that is also another research area called for. And I'll be finishing soon. I think, so basically, a lot of people also, other few issues is that like, because of our bad revenue performance, you can understand that in the budget,
the largest component is our interest rate. It's not the largest component that we are actually from our recurrent budget, we are giving the, 15 to 60% of the recurrent budget is to pay for interest rate. So I think if you can't increase actual revenue, this will keep on increasing, and our fiscal space is already 1% or 2% of actual budget. So we will drop down to further. There is a chance of dropping down to further. Another issue that we talked ourselves is that the way Bangladesh is actually financing the long-term investment, bank financing is a problematic one. I think we need a very strong bond market to finance long-term investment. Otherwise, you will have this problem of NPL with short-term investment. So I think, but we are not still prepared for that. And it's that I was told that they will overhaul the capital market management. I think they should think about like not only the new IPO secondary market, but also how they can actually revitalize or actually introduce the bond into the system. And my final points are that like the IMF conditionality. I don't want it conditionality. I think IMF suggestion. And this was actually prepared with our bureaucracy, with our the Minister of Finance, central bank official. So, and we all agreed to that one. So why now we are calling it the IMF condition is still not clear to me. But I think also as everyone has suggested that the NP government comes with 2/3 majority. I think this is the right time to go for the and I think the reform lists are quite long, but I think this is a partisan time. We can start doing it from the fiscal year, this budget. And also, possibly you know that government is also preparing a medium term, like 5-year framework, which is called 5-year strategic reform and development framework for inclusive and sustainable growth, which will be over 2026 and 2030. I think this is also partisan time. They call it 3R, by recovery, restoration, and reconstruction strategy. This will be based on this reform. I think this is the time for like big time reform. So with that, I'd like to close, and I'd like to thank all. Some of you already left because we are running over time. So and thanks to everyone, especially our sponsor. We hope that it will you keep on sponsoring us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Please. Was there any question? Timing into problem is capital.
Robin teacher and all the thoughtful work. That's true. That's
But
all the best. Right.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to know that you are now oil reservoir in 12 months. You're the new Saudi Arabia.